Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing what is really going on in the Middle East, what's happening in Iran, what are the issues that Israel is confronted through the strategic challenge posed by the Muslim Brotherhood, posed by Qatar, what is the true relationship between Hamas and the PLO in their government of national unity. And to answer these very, very important questions of the challenges that Israel face in the coming months and the coming years, it's a pleasure to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Mordechai Keder from the Begin and Sadat Center in Jerusalem. It was, I think, last July I had the pleasure of interviewing Mordechai for the Middle East Report, and that was one of the most interesting programs I've ever done. So it's fantastic to have you back here.
My pleasure and my honor.
And I'm looking forward very much to learning about what you have to say. But before we go into some of the very complex and strategic issues to do with the Middle East, can you just remind our viewers again about your background? Because you served very high up in the Israeli army, and now you're considered one of the authorities on the world on Islam and the Middle East.
Well, I was born 60 years ago in Tel Aviv, and I learned Arabic since my 7th year in school, and I majored in Arabic already in school, high school. Then I joined the army. I served 25 years in the military intelligence in all kinds of positions which involved Arabic day and night. In 1995, I was released from the army and I joined the academia in the Arabic department of Bar Ilan University, and also a research center there at Bar Ilan, which is the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. Meanwhile, with the years, we at Bar Ilan decided to establish another center which will cover other aspects of the Middle East and Islam. And this is the Center for the Study of the Middle East and Islam, which is right now still under formation, because we are still waiting for the person who would like to sponsor this center, and thus this center will bear his name. This center, we felt that it's necessary, mainly because too many centers of research about the Middle East all over the world, especially in the United States and also here in Britain, are today influenced by money which comes from the Gulf. And once Gulf money is pumped into these centers, they changed their discourse from saying the reality about the Middle East to singing in praise of those rulers and their religion and their culture. We at Bar Ilan decided that we will never be bought by any Gulf money, because we will keep our independence and our accuracy, hopefully forever, by saying the truth about the Middle East, by exposing the reality of the Middle East and Islam, and will never abide to any dictates which will come upon us for money from the Gulf. I think that this center is necessary, especially since ignorance about the Middle East is spread all over the academic world today by those centers which operate by Gulf money. And this ignorance actually goes out, spills over to political arenas, to the media, to the societies, and the oblivious people today in the world who are taking decisions about the Middle East, how to behave in the Middle East, how to shape the Middle East, especially in governments in the West, they are oblivious, mainly because they are deceived by people who graduate from those centers and those think tanks and those departments which are bought by Gulf money. We will say the truth, and whoever will be willing to hear the truth about the Middle East and Islam will definitely have to take us in account.
How serious do you believe the situation of Middle East education is at our universities? I mean, it was back in the mid-90s that I attended the University of Manchester, had a Middle East department there, which I felt that the criteria and the lessons we were taught were kind of very balanced there, but there was already a very strong Islamist department and society there, certainly at university. But isn't there a great danger here then if Saudi money and also Gulf money is being pumped into academic institutions, that those next journalists who specialise in the Middle East, those who go into the civil service, maybe work for the Foreign Office, those who advise MPs and members of the House of Lords, are ill-informed because they have almost a very slanted, biased view of the realities of what's happening?
Definitely, this is what happens, especially when experts are being interviewed in TV and they interpret what happens according to what those in the Gulf want them to say, and people are oblivious about the reality. Look, I'll give you two examples. One is about the tribalism in the Middle East, which today is not only alive and kicking, it's alive and killing, because the mayhem in Iraq, what happens in Afghanistan, what happens in Syria, what happens in Libya, cannot be interpreted in an other way than tribalism. This is a kind of characteristic of Middle Eastern societies which is unknown in the West. And if you don't study what tribalism is, and you have to dedicate lessons, complete lessons, in order to understand, never mind, I'm not sending students to live with tribes in the Libyan desert, but at least a teacher who is knowledgeable about what tribalism is, which is a totally different culture from what people in Western societies, democratic societies, are aware of and knowing about. So you need somebody who is aware of that culture to explain to those students what it is to live in a tribal society. What are the quarrels? What are the issues? What could be the reasons for them to fight each other? Actually, the explanation how they behave. This is one side of a Middle Eastern component of culture which people didn't understand and didn't know about. The second thing is about Islamism, especially when it comes to the Muslim Brotherhood. People thought and were quoted to say, Muslim Brotherhood are nicely people who the only thing which they want is to pray 5 times a day, to go to Hajj, and to give the zakat when they don't. And there's the whole thing, and just like religious Christians or religious Jews. This is wrong, totally wrong, because what they believe in is the Sharia. And the Sharia law is something totally different from the Jewish halakha and other customs and obligations which Christians have. Because Sharia, first of all, is a political system before it is anything connected to religion. Because the connection between Islam as a religion and Islam as politics is like one side of the same coin, not even two sides. So Islam is about politics, about ruling others, about how to look at others like Christians and Jews from above, how to treat them as dhimmis, and this is actually the Sharia. The Jewish halakha has nothing to say about others, and so the Christian way of behavior. Okay, so Sharia, which was actually pushed to the margin by those academics in order to hide this reality, actually brought this ignorance about what the Muslim Brotherhood is and what is the agenda, therefore, of Muslim Brotherhood organizations in Egypt, in Tunisia, which took over the state either fully or partially, and the same organizations which operate today in Jordan, threaten to fragment the state as well. You find them in Libya, you find them, of course, in Syria today, and definitely in Iraq. So the fact that people in the West were not aware of this entity named Muslim Brotherhood actually is the result of years of operating of those academics in those think tanks which pushed aside and covered this reality. So tribalism in one side, Islamism on the other side are the two surprises today in the world, because they are now coming from under the rag to surprise everybody. Somebody actually hid those realities for years. This is why we think that it's time to expose the reality about the Middle East, and that's why we are waiting for the one who would like to help us establishing this think tank.
And do you think that's primarily the reason why, for example, the West, the British government, the European Union, and the United States State Department has misread the Arab Spring? That really has been hijacked by the Muslim Brotherhood, and now what we're seeing is the Islamists really coming to power across North Africa and the Arab world. What implications does this have for the future of democracy and freedom and pluralism in the Middle East, not alone to say Israel's situation?
Well, if democracy had some chances before the so-called Arab Spring, I think that these chances actually evaporated with the mayhem which we see today in the Middle East. Look, initially, Middle Eastern societies are not likely to accept democracy, because democracy is about human rights and political freedoms, and women's freedom, and freedom of religion, freedom from religion, freedom of speech, freedom of criticism, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, changing the regime, rule of law, all these components of democracy. I would even say all these ingredients of the democratic cake. Many of them, if not all of them, create severe allergy in Middle Eastern societies which could not accept freedom of women, freedom of expression, as we see today with the cartoons once in a while, freedom of religion, freedom from religion. Well, a Muslim who announces that he leaves Islam, the future of the connection between his head and shoulders is very short. So definitely, all these cornerstones of democracy, and of course, elections. Elections is once in 4 years. All these other components work 24/7 on 365. What is with them? Democracy, they can have democracy once in 4 years or once in 5 years. What about everyday issues like freedoms and rights? Minority rights. Look what happens to the Christians in the Middle East, all over the Middle East. The Copts in Egypt, and the Assyrians in Iraq, and the Maronites in Lebanon, and the other Christians, the denominations in Syria. They're all running away. Why? Because of the weather? Okay, so when you see the situation today in the Middle East deteriorates, somebody described the Arab world today like sinking in a swamp of fire, blood, and tears. And this is actually what happened when the economy in Egypt is in total collapse. Syria doesn't function as a state for a long time already. Iraq is fragmented between ethnic groups like Arabs and Kurds, and now tribes announce that they don't want to be anymore part of the Union of Iraq, and they announce statehood like New Jersey and Oklahoma, which might lead to statehood like France and Germany. Yemen is about to be redivided after it united itself in 1991. Now those from the south do not like those from the north. Sudan was divided a year and some months ago, and inside those two states, tribes keep fighting each other between the government in Khartoum and the district of Darfur, and Juba against others in southern Sudan. So when you see these states, actually, and Syria is going also to be fragmented. The Kurds already have their own district, which is rather stable, while the other parts of the country are mayhem. The Alawis are already streaming weapons and ammunition to their district in the west, in the northwest of Syria. The Druze in the south already preparing to maybe resume their independence, which they enjoyed until 1925, when the French forced on them to join the Syrian state forcibly. So Definitely, the Arab world actually today is shaking in a way that it will be fragmented to tribes, to ethnic groups, to religious groups, and to sects. All the four axes of division in the Middle East. And maybe new states will emerge from this mayhem, which will be, hopefully, I wish them, to be much more stable because they will be homogeneous rather than conglomerates which were made by who? By the colonialism. Britain, France, Italy when it comes to Libya. So definitely there's time to rethink the colonialism and to create new states like the Gulf Emirates. And this is actually the only stable situation in the Middle East, when every group has its own piece of land, even if small, and there are small countries in the world like Luxembourg and San Marino and Monaco and Gibraltar and the Vatican and Liechtenstein, and nobody there suffers from claustrophobia only because of the size. So this is actually what I think is the future of the Middle East, and you can see this in the Emirates. This is why, by the way, I think that the only solution for the Palestinians is to create the 8-state solution or the 8-Emirate solution. Already we have a state in Gaza, a Hamas state, and it is a state. Already more than 5 years since they took Gaza, the Hamas took Gaza by coup d'etat against the PLO. And they have their borders, they have the government, they have the legislative body, they have judicial system, they have their army, they have their military industry, they have everything which, and every organ of a state exists in Gaza. So, of course, they didn't announce independence, but announcement is only words. From any factual point of view, they are independent. Another state should be established in Nablus, in Jenin, every one of them, in Kalkilia, in Tulkarem, in Ramallah, in Jericho, in the Arab part of Hebron. And this way we have 7 states, city-states in the West Bank. Anyway, those tribes do not get married with each other. They don't cooperate with each other. And why create a new conglomerate which will be dysfunctional when we can create emirates like in the Gulf which can function? And people think that the emirates in the Gulf survive only because they have oil. This is wrong. Dubai has no oil and not gas, only soil, which they turned into business and free zone areas and so forth. And Iraq, on the other side, has oil, and so does Sudan and Yemen and Libya. All are oil-producing countries, and they are failing states because of the fragmentation of the societies and the fact that the societies are conglomerates of tribes and ethnic groups. So, to begin with, we should create separate states for every tribe in those cities, and they will be homogeneous, therefore stable. And when the society is stable, the political arena is stable, and you can build upon them very stable and flourishing economy. When the society is shaky and fragmented, political arena cannot function, and the economy doesn't function. So this is the only solution which can sustain, while Israel should stick forever to the rural areas of the West Bank in order to make sure that those hills do not turn into Hamas hills or Hezbollah mountains. Because nobody in the world can guarantee that the West Bank, if will be with territorial contiguity, will not turn into a Hamas, another Hamastan.
But isn't it what you're suggesting, what you're advocating for the future of the Middle East and the future of the Arab world is to have little emirates? Isn't this going contrary to the whole belief system of the Muslim Brotherhood, who want to actually create the Islamic Caliphate, which was lost when the Ottoman Empire fell after the First World War? I think it was 1918. They are wanting to establish their own Arabic superstate in the Middle East. Islamic superstate.
Well, this is the discourse. The reality, even with Islam, is all the way around. Islam failed to unify tribes ethnic groups, and even sects. The slogans are very nice. Islam, everybody sit around one fire and everybody sing Kumbaya together. These are the slogans. The reality is very sad, bloody. You see sects like Sunnis and Shias slaughter each other in big numbers. You see Wahhabis who declare that other schools of Islam are infidels. You see jihadists who slaughter others who do not share the jihadism with them. So on the slogans of Islam, which wants to unify all the Muslims into one state, are nice, very nice slogans. But the reality is totally opposite from this. So this is why I don't think that Islam will ever unify Muslims, because there will always be quarrels and disputes which will fragment them.
Interesting. Oh, that's extremely interesting. So, what was your hope now for Egypt? I mean, we've seen since the Arab Spring the removal of President Mubarak, and Israel had a very cold peace with Egypt. But the border between Israel and Egypt was a very quiet one along the Sinai. Now we've seen the Muslim Brotherhood come to power. We've seen the election of President Morsi. We're seeing the Islamic clerics who are part of the Muslim Brotherhood calling for the liberation of Jerusalem and a holy war. What do you think the future is for Israeli-Egyptian relations in light of the Muslim Brotherhood coming to power?
Well, if the Muslim Brotherhood were in power in the 70s, this would not be signed with Israel. This is against their genes. It's against their Jewish state by their slogans and everything. However, when they come to a situation where the whether they cancel it or not. Canceling it will cost them hell of a lot of support from the West. So far, the United States of America, which was behind this peace from the beginning, insists on the peace that should be continued by everybody. And United States of America actually feeds the Egyptians today.
Yeah.
So when they understand that America will stop feeding them if they cancel the peace agreement, they know on what side of the slice of the bread the butter is smeared. So this is why they continue with the peace, because the price for canceling it will be too high that they cannot afford. Who will feed them? Iran? Saudi Arabia? Okay, so this is why so far America succeeded to convince them to continue with the peace, although it's against their ideology, because the price will be too high to cancel it.
And before the start of the program, we had a very interesting discussion about the involvement of Qatar. Certainly their involvement in pushing for the Arab Spring, putting pressure on President Obama to force Colonel Gaddafi out of power, also putting pressure on President Mubarak of Egypt to step down. What is the role of Qatar in the Middle East today? Because they're also been instrumental in bringing Hamas and the PLO together under a so-called national unity government.
Well, Qatar, voila, is actually the most powerful country in the Middle East, and I would say one of the most powerful states in the world of today. This fact, by the way, was hidden by many who are working with Qatari money, not to expose this. What happened is, since 1996, Qatar launched the channel of Jazeera, which works with the money which they get from the gas well which they have in the Gulf. Al Jazeera from the beginning had a very, very clear agenda: anti-Westernism, anti-Christianity, anti-Israel, anti-Americanism, anti-Europeanism, anti-dictatorship in the Arab world. When you are anti all these, what are you for? Muslim Brotherhood. Those who operated this channel, those who were behind it, are openly members of the Muslim Brotherhood, supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood, and whatever was in this channel through the years was to promote the Muslim brothers all over the Arab and Islamic world. They succeeded immensely to topple the regimes or the presidents or the dictators in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Libya, in Yemen, and now they are shaking the throne of Assad. Qatar did it deliberately. They actually brought the fire from arena to arena. By showing 24/7 what is happening in Tunisia, they incited the Egyptians. By showing 24/7 what is happening in the Tahrir Square in Cairo, they brought the fire to Libya. By showing the fights in Libya, they convinced the Yemenites that yes, we can, also in Yemen. And the Syrians saw this, what happens in all over the Arab world, through Al Jazeera, they actually started the fire in Syria as well. No doubt Al Jazeera was that, and Al Jazeera is actually operated by Qatar. The one who operates Al Jazeera means that the Emir of Qatar actually toppled other presidents, much more powerful than him, with much bigger armies than what he has. He has no army at all. He has some patrol ships, patrol boats in the Gulf, nothing else. But with Al Jazeera, he succeeded to topple all those presidents as powerful, in spite of the fact that they were powerful as they were. Not only this, Qatar succeeded during the 2011 to push NATO, Europe, America, to work against or to operate against Gaddafi, to topple Gaddafi. And look, a superpower in the world is a state which operates its own forces far from its borders. A superpower is a state which operates other countries' armies far from their borders. And this is Qatar. Qatar operated NATO into Libya. This is why I say that Qatar is a superpower.
So, couple of questions that follow on this one. What is Qatar's aim and objective doing this? Is it a projection of power and influence across the Middle East, or is it wanting to change the Middle East in favor of their interests?
All the above.
All the above.
Acquiring power by using the heaviest heavy stick in the hands of the Emir of Qatar, which is Al Jazeera, and, of course, to promote with this heavy stick Islamism in the shape of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, why is Al Jazeera as a channel? Look, I don't think that Revelation TV is a heavy stick in the hand of anybody. How come Al Jazeera became such a heavy stick? After all, it's only a satellite channel. What made it such a heavy stick? The Arab world is driven by the culture of shame. Because the last thing which an Arab would allow is to have shame on himself. He will struggle with whatever he has against shameful things which are being said about him. Al Jazeera, with the years, collected information, shameful information, about the Arab leaders. Once in a while, they would expose it, hitting them in the most aching organ which they have, legitimacy. Because a ruler whose legitimacy is being undermined by a channel of TV channel, actually has no legitimacy and will ultimately fall. And this is what they did to King Hussein in Jordan. This is what they did to Mubarak. This is what they did to all the others. And in a culture, in the Arab culture, where shame is one of the most I would say, dangerous things which can happen to a person. You can manipulate people by collecting shameful information about them, what to do with the money, what to do with women. Look, in other countries like in Europe, especially France, for example, a president or a prime minister who has an affair with a lady, so what? Nothing happens. It doesn't really affect his status. And we saw it through history. Yeah. In the Arab world, if you expose such information about somebody, he will commit a suicide because he will not be able to show his face in public, especially if he is a ruler, somebody who's exposed because of his politician or so forth. So this is why Al Jazeera became such a heavy stick. He collected shameful information about those rulers, and this is why they let him work in their states, in spite of the fact that they were inciting the masses against the rulers, because they were afraid that if they kick out the teams of Al Jazeera from their own states, they will expose the information which they have.
No,
so out of fear, they surrendered to Al Jazeera and actually to Qatar. And this is how Qatar became such a powerful state in the Middle East.
So you're really saying that really Qatar has actually used the media and the power of Al Jazeera in order to gain power and dominance over the Arab world?
Look, this is very well based in the political science of today. We define between hard power and soft power. Hard power are armies, air forces, tanks. Soft power is media, science, arts, all kinds of these soft things which a state can develop and ultimately become component of power. And in today's world, soft power is very hard. Look at China. What made China such a superpower? The army? No, the economy. Inventions. Copying others' inventions. All these are soft power. Japan, in the 80s, maybe to the 90s, what made them such? Again, industry, innovation. Europe is in a way, superpower, not because of the armies, not because of modernism and arts. Okay, this is what makes Europe important in the world. So Qatar built its own status with Al Jazeera. Soft power, but very, very powerful power.
So by that projection of power, particularly by using Al Jazeera, isn't there a danger now for Qatar is in that they're creating enemies? Because surely the Saudis will find this threatening. Certainly the Iranians won't want to see the Qatar having a greater influence than Iran actually in the region. So how does Qatar challenge the other threats and from the other states in the Middle East?
Well, Saudi Arabia, to begin with, never let Al Jazeera crew put their feet on Saudi soil. Start with this. Only sometimes in the Hajj, they let them to come to Mecca, and right after the Hajj, they chase them out because they know their agenda. And whenever a Saudi goes to Qatar, which is a neighboring state, to appear in front of the cameras of Al Jazeera, when he goes back to Saudi Arabia, he has to be very careful for the connection between his head and shoulders, because most probably the Saudi authorities will not like it at all. And when they do not like somebody, it's not a guarantee for long life for this man. Some Saudis are doing it, endangering their own life by appearing on Al Jazeera. So this is how Saudi Arabia keeps itself from Al Jazeera. Iran threatened Qatar, not only because of Al Jazeera, because Qatar today is the host of the American biggest air force in the Gulf. If hostilities erupt in the Gulf, the Qatar might be the airbase from which American airplanes will take off in order to attack Iran. Of course, Qatar already announced that it will not let America use the Qatari soil in order to attack Iran. But I believe that is only words. They don't really mean it, because actually America protects Qatar from being taken by Iran. And the Qataris know very well what the Iranian intentions are, because Iran already took Iraq, and people are not aware of it. Iraq, which was liberated from Saddam Hussein in 2003 with the blood and money of Americans, of British and others who came to Iraq to rescue those poor Iraqis from the wrath of Saddam Hussein. Today, Iraq is the humble servant, the obedient servant of Iran. Iran took Iraq with no fire. They intimidated them, they bought others, and some explosions here, and people are being targeted there. And today, Iraq behaves according to the Iranian dictates. Iraq today is sending troops and soldiers and snipers to Syria according to Iran's agenda. Iraqi companies are bringing money to Iran because Iran is out of the SWIFT system. In the world, you cannot pay for Iranian oil anymore. So people who take Iran or buy Iranian oil pay Iraqis, and those Iraqis are moving the money to Iran. And so forth. There are much evidence about the fact that Iran is controlling Iraq. The Kuwaiti parliament already had some discussions about the question whether to join Iran peacefully or not, because they understood already that the Western leadership will not come to save them again if they are again occupied, this time by Iran, as the world came in 1991 to rescue them from the paws of the Iraqis. The Saudis are shaking because of the Iranians, because they know very well that the Iranians are looking at Mecca as their goal, because they want to restore the Shi'i rule of Islam, which was taken from the Shiites in the mid-7th century, and to restore the caliphate in the hands of the Shiites. This is what the Iranians are willing, because for them, this will be closing the circle of oppression which they suffered from the Sunnis. And the Saudis know it very well. And so forth, all the Emirates in the Gulf are shaking from the fear. Israel also is afraid of Iran, no doubt, because we know that the Iranians will wipe us from the map if they only have the nuclear weapons. This is why we take Iran very seriously. Yet I personally think that Israel is not the first target for the Iranians. The Iranians will first spread their hegemony over the Gulf in order to put their hegemony over like 60% of the world reserves of oil and gas. What they have, what the Iraqis have, and what the Gulf has, and what Saudi Arabia has. Altogether more than 60%. And they will become a superpower in the world only because they control the economy of the world through energy. Israel can wait, in as much as I understand from their point of view, because they think by the verse in the Quran which says, Inna Allaha ma'a sabirin, Allah is with those who have patience. They waited 14 centuries in order to restore the caliphate of the Shiites. They are still waiting, and they will wait with Israel. Israel allegedly has some kind of deterrence vis-a-vis the Iranians. I personally don't know, but there are all kinds of rumors about what Israel might have. So Israel is too dangerous to mess with. The Gulf is much less dangerous, and the benefits from taking the Gulf are much bigger. Afghanistan, another failing state, which the West is willing to get out anytime, will be taken by the Iranians because it's the neighbor of Iran from the east. Iran will take Afghanistan in no time in order to control this state, failing state, and in order to take advantage of the minerals and everything which was found in the soil of Afghanistan. They cannot wait until the Americans and the Brits and the others will run away from Afghanistan in order to take this country as well. This is what Iran is about, and imagine if they have also nuclear weapons in order to convince the others not to interfere in their march to hegemony all over the region, which will influence the economy of the whole world. And another dangerous issue, the Iranians know already how to launch missiles from submarines. The only component which they still miss is a nuclear weapon. Imagine what will happen in the world when they will be able to launch a missile from a submarine carrying a nuclear weapon, nuclear warhead. They will control the world from under the water because they will pose threats from under the seas on everywhere in the world. And I wouldn't tolerate even the chance of 1 to 100 that this scenario happens.
It's interesting because there's been a lot of discussions about the nature of the threat that Iran would pose if Iran acquires nuclear weapons. Primarily, it would lead to a proliferation of nuclear weapons in the region. They continue their support for Hezbollah and possibly Hamas, even factions of Al-Qaeda, to carry out a dirty bomb attack, possibly on New York or on Paris or in London. But I've never heard the argument before that they actually want to have nuclear weapons fitted to submarines. That puts the strategic threat not only to Israel on the west, but on a whole new type of level. Knowing this information, do you believe that Israeli airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities are imminent? Or if President Obama is re-elected for a second term, do you think he'll have the moral courage to actually go after Iran's nuclear weapon program?
Look, Netanyahu doesn't tell me what he wants to do, and he doesn't share with me his plans. Start with this. Secondly, looking at the Israeli society and political system and so forth, I tend not to believe that Israel will sacrifice itself in order to save the world from the Iranian problem. Iran is the problem of the world before it is any problem for Israel. And I'm not trying to say that Israel is in the moon in this respect. But Israel doesn't feel that it has to do the job of the world because Iran is a threat to the world. Netanyahu tries to wake the world up, to shake the boat with the world, to ring the bell, name it as you like. So far, he apparently didn't succeed. Although he knows, and many others know, the only way how to convince the Iranian to stop with their nuclear program, the only way is to send them a very, very clear message. Dear Iranians, you have 1 week, 7 days, to load all your nuclear program on a ship or 2 or 3, as many as you need, and to send them to us. In a week, we start to flatten you. Don't call us. We will not call you. Don't ask for more time. In a week from now, we start bombing you. If they hear the engines of the airplanes start warming up, the ships, the ground forces start moving to the Gulf, they will believe that the threat is credible. And there is a big difference between a threat and a credible threat. A threat by itself doesn't work. Only a credible threat works. And when the world's threat will be credible, the more credible the threat is, the less are the chances that there will be a war. Because the Iranians will give up. They are not suicidal as a state, as a regime, as a society. They send people to commit suicide. But as a state, they are not suicidal. They are there to stay, not to vanish. And when they understand, if they understand, that this is the end of the game, and the world actually will wipe them, as a state, they will surrender. They will give up on their nuclear program. Military nuclear. They will obey the demand.
So why are we not seeing that? If that's the case, which I believe it is, why are we not seeing America using her full military power to actually put those threats on the table, to give clear red lines regarding Iran's nuclear program, and actually threaten Iran with military airstrikes if they do not stop or halt their nuclear weapons program?
Well, this question should be directed to the White House. Why don't you put clear red lines with clear timetable before they acquire nuclear weapons? I have no idea. Maybe they know something which I don't. Maybe they have some kind of agreement with Iran. I have no idea. All kinds of rumors which go around the world. But I really don't know why the Americans and NATO do not take the only possible way to stop the Iranians. Look, sanctions, as heavy as they can be, are not likely to, or unlikely to convince dictators. Sanctions did not convince Saddam during the 10 years of the 90s to obey the world. Sanctions never worked in Syria also in the last 2 years. Sanctions didn't work on Gaddafi. The only thing which worked on Gaddafi to give up on his nuclear program was when he saw what happened to Saddam Hussein. Means he saw the heavy stick, he saw the engines, and he saw the ships, and he saw what happens to somebody who doesn't obey. So he decided that he doesn't want the fate of Saddam Hussein, so he gave up. Means the threat to Libya was a credible threat. So far, the Iranians did not see a credible threat. So this is why they keep buying time, deceive the world, con the world, and the world is still sleepwalking not to see the Iranian threat on the civilization, not only on Israel and Europe. They threat the Western civilization because it's permissive, it's secular, it's materialistic, everything which contradicts Islam, at least in their view. So this is actually what drives them to topple the West as a civilization, states, regimes, culture, because they see themselves as mu'minin, means believers, while all the others, Jews, Christians, infidels, are apostates and infidels. So this is how they view the world, and the world should tell them exactly what the world thinks about them, and to do what is necessary in order to stop them before it's too late.
Mordechai, we're down to the last 3 minutes of the programme, and I could do another hour with you because talking to you is absolutely fascinating. But in the last 3 minutes, what do you feel are Israel's main threats in the Middle East in the coming months and the years? And can Israel ride out the storm known as the Arab Spring turning into the Arab Winter?
Well, I don't ignore the dangers of, let's say, weapons of mass destruction which are piled in Syria and might find their way to hands of all kinds of organizations like Hezbollah, the Jihad, and others, one of the hundreds of militias which today fight each other in Syria. I cannot deny it. It is a scenario which Israel and other states like Turkey and other states should take into account. I don't ignore the Iranian, of course, danger. However, when I see the swamp of blood, fire and tears around Israel, Israel appears again as an island of stability, of sanity, of democracy, human rights, political freedoms, and everything which we in Europe, we in Israel and in Europe, would like to share as normal states. This is Israel, in spite of the mayhem around it. We Israelis tend to describe ourselves as a villa in the jungle. I think today it is more than convincing that this is the situation.
Mordechai, I want to thank you so much for being my guest on today's Middle East Report, and thank you so much for giving us all a real insight into what's really happening behind the scenes, what's happening behind the news headlines, and to give us a real perspective of what's going on.
Thank you very much, Simon, for letting me say this thing from this beloved channel, Revelation TV.
Thank you very much. And I just want to thank you all for watching today's Middle East Report. It's so important that we educate ourselves, that we inform ourselves about what's going on in the world, in particular the Middle East, and particularly when it comes down to Israel, that we shouldn't rely on just relying on news reports we're seeing on our television screens. We have to actually find out the information ourselves. We need to find out what's happening. And one good way of doing that is by acquiring information from the Begin and Sadat Center, from Dr. Mordechai himself, so we have a greater understanding of what's really happening and what's really shaping the Middle East, because what happens in the Middle East has a real impact on Europe, it has an impact on the United States, it has an impact on the future of the world, and Israel is that beacon of light. Israel is what's right in the Middle East, and that's why it's important that if we are to spread that beacon of light, which is Israel, we need to support Israel and the Jewish people, particularly as they're in the storm, as we see the emergence of the Arab Spring, which has turned into the Arab Winter, with all the complexities of the Middle East. And we've got a song now that pays tribute to the brave men and women who defend Israel's borders.
השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מהדם ועד עולם. שיר המעלות אשא את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ומבואך. מעתה